Yep.
Why are you doing this?
Yeah, that's it, Joe. I don't, is it helpful if I give any background on Project MedTech, or is most everyone familiar with it? I know
I think no, Star. I'm more curious about this unusual way to start a presentation.
All right. So I'll flip it over to Rich here, but this is the question that we ask any startup we ever engage with, which is it doesn't matter if they're a pre-seed company, they're a seed, they're a Series A, just why are you doing this, and what is your end goal? And this is really how it relates to the finance side of things. But this is a question you have to ask yourself, because this is going to affect everything else we talk about here from a fundraising side, and who you're raising money from, when you're raising money, and why you're raising money. So we're going to go through a lot of basics and building blocks to make sure we kind of have all of this. And then at the end of this, Rich and I went through and scrubbed 3 examples of clients of ours, and talked about, kind of how we got the deal done from an investment side. So Rich, I'll kind of kick it over to you and scroll through the slides here.
Yeah. The other reason we talk about why are you doing this is to get everybody in the right mindset. I think when most founders start a company, whether they're clinicians, inventors, scientists, engineers, they do it because they're passionate about a particular issue, or it's impacted their family, themselves, whoever. And so the mindset before we jump into the funding side is that not every investor thinks that same way. And so when we talk about this, it's important to separate not only the passion you have for the project, but put the mindset of an investor who's looking for a return. And it's a bit more cold than probably the way we approach it, but it's important as we talk about this, it's important for us to get into the head of an investor so that we can properly negotiate these things on behalf of yourselves and put yourselves in the best position as an entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm.
So this is basically MedTech Investing 101. So a lot of this you're probably going to know, but it's good to just go overview and have a baseline of information so we all kind of work off of the same assumptions. So various types of funding, right? We have non-dilutive. There's NIH, NSF, STTR, SBIR, right? We're all familiar with those grants that are submitted on a recurring basis throughout the year. There's university grants, there's pitch competitions, right? All of these things can come in and bring capital into the organization. The SBIN conference I just mentioned, we gave away a $100,000 check, or the organization did, and Project MedTech was one of those sponsors to an early stage set of, actually the group that won was a group called SoundPass. That's for University of Utah med students, right, for cerebral hemorrhage device. But this is all types of non-dilutive funding that you can bring into your organization that don't impact the cap table. Go ahead, Duane. So diluted players in order of, I'll probably say, organization of when they're investing, but angel investors, angel investors, rich folks, angel investment groups, bunch of rich folks, right? In a room. Family offices, really rich folks that have their own office. Foundations, right? Think of Bill Gates Foundation. Venture studios. Venture studios are basically a bunch of entrepreneurs that have money that are investing in projects and want to be a co-founder and provide you with wraparound services and take it to the next level. Venture capital firms are all familiar with, right? They have LPs, there's a GP, they have returns and capital call structures, and very much managed like a private equity fund. It's just about investing in a different thesis at a different time of a business cycle. Hospital venture groups, right? Rex Health Ventures in North Carolina, University Hospitals Venture Group in Cleveland, Orlando Health Ventures, right? These are groups where hospitals have a for-profit entity that is spun off of the hospital system that allows for them to invest in projects that impact the ecosystem there within that hospital sector. University venture groups, I'll chime in with my alma mater, Blue Streak Ventures, which is John Carroll University. Finance students like to do investment clubs. Same type of thing with venture capital. They have alumni investing in a capital fund. The students put together investment memos and invest in projects that are presented from other alumni. So there's a lot of those groups out there. Trying to think who else is a big one. Clemson has a big venture group. Harvard Business Angels, there's a big alumni group there, Alumni Ventures. And then obviously strategics and strategic venture arms, J&J, Stryker, all those groups have their own types of investment groups as well.
Yeah, and I think 2 things to point out here too. On the hospital venture side, you're really going to want to do your due diligence there to make sure they do outside in investment. There's, Rich named a few, but there's quite a few different examples, right? Cleveland Clinic Ventures does all inside out, right? So you're not going to approach Cleveland Clinic Ventures and potentially get an investment there. University Hospitals, Orlando Health, some of these others, they do this outside in investment. So I think it's important to make sure you do your research there. And now Cleveland Clinic could do outside in if they wanted to. So it's always good to kind of check back in. The other thing too with the strategic venture arms is to make sure you understand their fund formation as well. There's some that'll invest off the balance sheet. There's some that set aside a fund that behaves very similar to a venture capital firm. And there's others that are able to do both. So there's a pretty prominent group that actually does. They have a venture fund that they kind of created themselves, and then each individual business unit can do off-balance sheet investments. And those leaders of those business units are also part of an angel investment group from that strategic. So there's 3 different ways you can engage that strategic. So just make sure you're doing your research here and figuring out how they're operating.
So from a timing and fund perspective, as we look at pre-seed, seed, Series A, Series B, we'll go into the definition of these rounds as well. But bootstrapping and friends and family and incubators and maybe some early angels, they really invest in the pre-seed rounds. That's where you see a lot of safes in our industry. Those are kind of going out of style these days and moving over to convertible notes. But the angels continue to bleed into the seed rounds. There's maybe some corporate investors involved in those seed rounds and beyond. And then obviously venture capital gets involved in seed plus and beyond as well. So this is kind of where you start to see some of these groups start to fall in line of where they like to invest. And it's really a matter of check size, right? Where they can make the most impact with their dollars and stretch them for the organizations to get to a nice value inflection point.
Yeah, and one quick comment too, here on the incubator side of things, you could also find some non-dilutive capital in these incubators, accelerators, right? For example, the state of Ohio offers a pretty lucrative program for startup companies, and being a part of accelerators, they'll pick up some tab on some entrepreneurial services. So another kind of, you could do dual, both non-dilutive and dilutive.
So different types of investment vehicles, right? You have convertibles, which are safes, and then convertible notes. History on the convertible note side, right? When you think about private equity investment, they look at EBITDA, they look at top line, they put a multiple based on the market, they give you a value for the organization. Venture capital is not that way. There's no value in the organization. If you were to seek investments under a private equity or cash flow, discounted cash flow model, an investment in an early stage company would take 100% control, right? There is no value. It's all strategic value, theoretical value for the future. And so convertible debt was created specifically for that type of circumstance, right? We don't know the value. So we need to achieve some milestones to kick the can on that valuation. That's the purpose of it. Convertible debt is debt, right? That converts into equity based on some qualified financing event or some liquidation preference. There's usually a discount off of the price round or a value cap, which is basically the way to think about that is it's upside protection for the investors of the convertible debt or downside protection when you think about it from a discount. So both ends of the spectrum is good for early taking on that earlier risk. There's also interest side to it, right? So you get a little extra benefit for your principal that you invest in the company, and that's kind of icing on the cake. Safe notes were created by the Y Combinator back in 2013 because they wanted to deploy capital faster. They didn't want it to be debt. They didn't want it to be restrictive for organizations, especially when you have grants. There's usually impact of what you can take on in terms of debt, and convertible debt would fall under that category. So safes are not debt, nor they're not equity. It's just the ability to purchase future equity. And it's the same mechanism of action as convertible debt, meaning there's a discount, there's a value cap, upside and downside protection. Again, safes are going out of style a little bit, but most, the pre-seed round safes are still around. Convertible debt's more appropriate for angels. Go ahead, Stephen.
Can you tell me why safes are going out? Like, to me, so I'm pretty big on the tech side. Safes probably like 90% of what's being used at this point, and it's more protection for the founder versus the convertible note. Nobody's really on the debt side of it. And I know it started at Y Combinator, but even now, like Carter just said, I think around like 48% of MedTech is now moving towards safe, and there's a growing trend for it. So raising money, we're raising via safe. We're a tech-enabled MedTech platform. So I'm just kind of curious if you can speak a little bit on that.
So think about the risk-free rate of return in the market, right? If I'm an angel investor and I have a UBS savings account or Amex savings account, my rate of return is 5%, right? Risk-free. I'm going to make 5% on my money. And I invest in a safe. First of all, there's no rights there for me as an investor, limited rights. And then 2, there's no interest. So why am I taking on additional risk for no interest when I could put it in a risk-free rate of return account? Now that was the lifestyle back when interest rates were really high. We're starting to see a decline. So there might be a shift now back to safes. And to your point, Stephen, tech is more focused on safes than med tech, like hard tech. So there is a little bit of a dynamic shift there, and especially depending on the coasts. If you're on the coast, safes are still there. Midwest, not so much. So I think it's also where your investors are located. That's a trend. But to your point, if you extract the data from Carta and pull out tech-enabled devices or just tech in general, you're going to find that may not be the trend for everything.
Yeah. I think it's like 64% of MedTech is still raised in early stages on convertible note.
Yeah. I think too, Rich, the last time we gave this presentation at DC Fest, right? I think we also just talked kind of about the pendulum, right? In 2020, 2021, it was a founder-friendly capital raising environment, and a lot of those companies are taking down rounds, and so that's kind of shifting the pendulum to more of an investor friendly environment. So you're going to start to see convertible notes kind of pick up.
You say more and more companies are doing down rounds. What can you give us a sense of magnitude?
Yeah, so just maybe down round's not the right term. So if we were looking at 2018, 2019, 2020, early 2020 data, valuations were through the roof, right? We all saw it. Now what that meant was, though, these companies were doing major rounds at higher valuations. They bled that capital, and now they're going back to the capital markets to raise more money. The issue is, especially those Series A, B, C rounds, they raised at such high valuations that going back to the market in today's environment where valuations have come back down, they can't raise the same amount of money at the same valuation. So their valuation multiple, right? So from where they were to where they're going next, that lift isn't there. It's not as strong, or it's flat or theoretically down if they haven't made enough progress. So that's why you're seeing a lot of those, especially in the Carta data, you're seeing a lot of companies starting to go close or do bridge rounds to basically wait till the markets cool off again.
Thank you.
So other types of vehicles, equity price round, simply.
I've got a question, because I'm a member of some angel investment groups, and for that period of time, I was seeing people make all these pitches about their tech and how novel it was, but it was 510K, and then at the end of the day, they would have like these, I'll call them the unicorn valuations, and it's like, really? It's like, this is near commodity, but your valuation is 35 million and you're free money. Like, what? That's insane. Or some of them were like 100 million, and I'm like,
yeah, and no, it's a good point, Michelle. And I think when I use baseball analogy when we talk about exits, especially with our clients. Singles, doubles, triples, home runs, and the occasional sacrificial bunt, right? And so when you think about exits, and if you want to be a home run in the MedTech space, you're 10x on your valuation, right? So to your point, if I'm raising money at a $35 million pre-money, well, then by God, I should be hitting a $350 million exit. But if I look at the comps and those are not really hitting that number, well, then I'm looking like a triple or a double or a single, right? And so in an entrepreneur-friendly environment, there's competition for good deals, which draws up the valuation. So you're right, on paper and logically, you look at that, say it's a commodity product. There's no way in hell that would be valued at that level. Sure, but the demand is high, right? Investors are looking and hungry for deals. And so it's a supply-demand issue. And that's partially why things are coming back down and cooling off, is because a lot of capital, part of it's the risk-free rate of return. Part of it is also the fact that a lot of LPs, so angels are also LPs in major venture capital funds, their dollars are tied up in deals that are now stretching further. So exits aren't happening as more frequently, where the capital is not being recycled back in the market. And so if dollars are being held in companies longer and liquidity events aren't happening, there's kind of a bottleneck in terms of flow of capital, which is also a reason the supply is high in terms of companies needing investment, but the demand is low for investors because they just don't have enough capital, or it's tied up still. So there's kind of a mixed bag of problems here that's creating this pendulum of valuation. Go ahead, Stephen.
So please tell me to stop at any point.
Stop it.
You see a potential trend in different M&A activity, exit activity, even investment activity, even just now that the election's behind us. Our CFO does S1 filing, and his firm is just absolutely inundated with new S1 opportunities.
Yeah. So specifically, is your question for private equity or IPOs, or is it more where you want to go? Private equity. So yeah, private equity on the M&A front, things are heating back up. It's partially due to the interest rates, partially due to the election being over, and there's more certainty in what the markets are going to do, right? Taxes in terms of corporate tax and those extensions. Already talking about extending those corporate tax rates again. So that's part of it. The other part of it too is just uncertainty in the market. Private equity firms have always been hunting. That's never stopped. There's a lot of money wrapped up in private equity firms. That's why you're seeing CPA firms being bought by private equity, which has never been done before, mainly because there's a cash flow, right? Steady cash flow there. So they're looking in new markets to deploy that capital. So things are still heating up. I think the other thing is that there's a level of exhaustion on the ownership, right, for who owns those companies, especially if they're still mom and pop shop companies. So things are coming back around. I wouldn't say that it's industry specific. It's still industry specific. So you'd have to kind of dive in and analyze it that way. But overall, at a macro level, yeah, things are cooling off to the point where multiples are going to start coming back up again, and deals are still going to start getting done.
Thank you. I'll stop for a little bit. Appreciate it.
Stephen, offline, if you're interested in a specific industry, send me a note. I'm happy to go down a rabbit hole with you.
Yeah, let's definitely catch up. I'll appreciate it.
Warrants and side letters too, just to kind of get into those. We'll go into a couple examples here momentarily, but the idea with warrants and side letters, these are sweeteners of certain investors, right? Whether they're strategic or lead or whatever the case might be. There are levers you can pull as an entrepreneur to sweeten the deal for people to encourage them to jump over the goal line with you and invest. And again, we'll get into examples of how to deploy those in a proper fashion, but those are, again, arrows in your quiver you can leverage. So standard phases of MedTech innovation, and I know we talked about tech MedTech. Again, this is kind of agnostic. It's a generalization. Things are different. The joke I make here is that in order to attract an investor, people have been labeling their rounds in different fashions. So the seed rounds are now Series A rounds for a lot of MedTech companies, right? And so on and so forth. You're kind of escalating because you're trying to attract that level of investor because you need that much capital or that check size or whatever the case might be. And so when we talk about, hey, we didn't hit milestones, we didn't hit, the markets are tanking, I don't want to do a price round. Well, then we go into what's called bridge rounds, right? And friends and family, seed plus, pre-A, pre-B, these are all labels for bridge rounds because bridge has a negative connotation because we didn't do what we said we were going to do from a timeline perspective. But at the end of the day, these are here to kick the valuation discussion until the next price round when things are more opportunistic for the company and their shareholders. Go ahead, Sue. Oh, you're on mute.
I have a question. So when do you jump from, like, we're raising a bridge round right now, and according to my advisors, they're like, you don't really need to run into a Series A until you're making money. Is that true?
No, I mean, well, making money can be two different things. It could be top line or it could be profitable. I would argue, and we'll get into this, what are the types of exits in MedTech? There are three major exit zones. There's preclinical, where our science is so doggone, sweet that, go back up, Duane, sorry, to that chart. Actually, that's a good thing to use. There's the seed round here, and we'll get into what this is, but that preclinical, we don't even have to commercialize the product. Someone's going to gobble us up. That's a preclinical exit. You see that a lot in PMA and, really interesting de novos. There's post-limit market release, which is after your Series A, we've poked the bear enough where our strategic is going to gobble us up. We have a couple key accounts, they're reordering, we're scaling, we're penetrating the market appropriately. We could take it to the next level and heavily commercialize, but there's strategic interest there. It's probably better to do it right now, right? Then there's heavily commercialized exits where now we're moving into profitability and cash flow positive. That's maybe where private equity is getting involved, mezzanine debt, possible IPO in the future. That's a long haul and requires Series B, C rounds to kind of take you to that finish line. You're scaling up to 50 plus employees. You have your own warehouse, blah 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 blah. So that's the exit zones we're talking about. To your question though, specifically, most Series A investors want to see, they usually throw out $1 million of recurring revenue or something like that. In reality, what they want to see are key accounts reordering your product, because what that's showing is there's traction in the marketplace. People are liking the product to the point where it's displacing a current competitor. They want to see traction, right? That's de-risking that enough for them to deploy a larger check, which is in that 1 to 2 million plus range check size where the VCs are getting engaged. Otherwise, you're kind of doing bridge rounds in between that. In some cases, a Series A might not require revenue. Tech-enabled devices, absolutely. Hard tech, maybe not, just depending on if you need to do a clinical study or you're doing first in human or whatever the case might be. So it just depends.
Yeah, Sue, something to, Rich's group within Project MedTech does a lot of financial pro formas. And one thing we always beef up is the cost commercialization is going to take, because however long you think it's going to take more. No matter how much we do. We just saw all these companies pitch at our event, and there were a few that 2 years into commercialization they were generating like $50 million in revenue, and that's not going to happen. I don't care if you have every reimbursement code you think you could possibly have under the sun, you still have to walk into a hospital and convince them to purchase your product. And so I think that is probably where antennas go up for Rich and us, is when we hear, well, I don't think I have to raise another round to get to this commercialization point. Probably not the case. Yeah.
The other thing is Series A investors like to get out of the valley of death as much as possible. There's a statistic of how many products are cleared or approved by the FDA that never get commercialized. And that's the valley of death. Moving from regulatory and all the stuff you got to do is just checking the boxes. Not that it's easy and I'm oversimplifying it, but it's just, what you have to do and what your results need to be. When you go to commercialization, that's a whole different ballgame. That's more of a crystal ball. And so when that's the valley of death zone, if you can get out of that or show that you're on the upside of getting out of that, that's where venture capital and Series A get more interested. And that's a lot of VCs are interested in 3, 4x returns. They're not interested in the 10x that an angel investor might theoretically see, because they've de-risked it. That de-risking is allowing them to take less of a return, but they kind of have more confidence in the capital being returned to their LPs.
Yeah, one other thing too, and Rich can share more examples on this than I can, but what you're trying to avoid there is not raising enough and getting to the point where now you're in like a really hard negotiation spot. You're not really holding the cards, because you get to that spot, the people who are going to lose if you raise more money there are going to be the entrepreneur and all the early stage investors, right? And we've seen that happen, right, Rich, on a number of scenarios where people kind of just got in trouble with that. So
Right. I've got a question back to the kind of the marking at the FDA clearance. What do you think of the strategy where companies are getting, say, there's a 510K pathway for a particular indication, but they know that that's not what they want to sell the product for, but their play is to prove to a strategic that the technology works and get the strategic to license or acquire it, and so that they pay for whatever clinical is needed for the actual indication that's worth.
Yeah, you're referring to a build to buy strategy, right? We're building it to a point to buy the company, and they're
is that like Build a Bear?
Kind of, right? They get to pick out what's going on, but no, it's the problem with that, Michelle, is that is a strategy, and sometimes it works and works out for people, but it is all your eggs in one basket. And so what we like to see in our clients is that there's multiple pathways for success. A 510K product might be the easiest way to get something on the market, but a de novo, because competition's all 510K, or there is no 510K or no predicate, de novo might be the better way, because now we're kind of boxing out the market, which makes it more strategic for an exit and more valuable for an exit, or allows for an earlier exit, right? So again, you got to analyze it from multiple angles. I think there's a lot of groups, especially product development firms, and nothing against them because they're all great. It's the challenge there is that they're focused on getting you to the big MOQ orders. And so when they push for 510Ks, sometimes it's because they want those big orders to start flowing through, but it might not be the best avenue for the exit. And so as we talk about these companies, and I'll get into what this chart means because it's kind of going along this topic, you got to start with the exit in mind. Who are we going to exit to? What are the types of exits we're going to look at? What's the comp looks like? What's the industries that are ripe appetite? Once you understand that concept and what type of avenues you can go down, you can back into how much money you need to raise and what valuations theoretically could be in order to fit that 10x return. If you're thinking 25, and again, not everybody's going to be 10x, not everybody's a home run. But if you need to raise 50 million, but you're only going to exit for 250, your valuation game is a little tighter versus somebody that could exit for 350 and we only need 15 to raise to get there. So the game is a little different. You got to understand what all the pieces mean. And it's a formula, it's algebra.
Yeah, and Michelle, I think the one piece too that you kind of bring up here that's important to call out, which is in these early stages, you should really be thinking about how you're going to achieve as much positive clinical data as you can. And so that is where I see some of these, like the strategy you just referred to as well, being really important. If you can achieve those things, there's a lot of value in that, right? And strategics and other MedTech companies look at that and say, great, as long as we have these results, we'll just throw it into our, distribution system. I mean, that's essentially what some of the strategics have become, right? Is a distribution center with 2,000 salespeople on the ground selling to every hospital in the world.
So this example that I'm showing here, as we raise capital and go through this cycle, it's important for us to time our fundraisers around major value inflection points. There's nothing worse than going to market with your back against the wall, you're running out of capital and you haven't achieved any major milestones. Submission to the FDA, that's table stakes, it's clearance. It's office actions on IP. It's human clinical results coming back positive. These are the things that move the needle in value, and we have to time the fundraises. So people always, especially these early pages, people are like, I don't know how much I'm supposed to raise. 2 million sounds about right. But when you put the numbers on the table and align those numbers with what you have to accomplish with the value inflection points, it might be 2, it might be 2.5 or 5, it might be 1, right? But you got to understand what are the milestones that you need to accomplish to increase value, and when are you planning to achieve those, and then timing the fundraises and the block of expenses you need to spend is your fundraise plus 20% buffer. So going through this analysis, starting with the exit in mind and working your way back, that helps figure out how much you're supposed to raise, not only in this current round that you're raising, but the subsequent round. And the rationale with the subsequent round and understanding that timing is that we can warm up the investors today that are more appropriate for that later round, even though they're not interested today. hey, we're not raising capital. You're not a fit for our current round, but want to keep you apprised of our progress. It looks like your thesis fits where we're going. Now they can follow along with your traction. So it's more of a warmed up approach. So when you do have 6 to 8 months of runway left, you can go approach those folks saying, hey, we're starting our next round and you're a fit. And they already know who you are. They've already been following you. And so this is why it's important to build the whole plan up front.
Hey, Rich, we actually, at the conference, so this is the first event we've had that Rich hasn't been able to come to because he had to go to a different one. But one of the entrepreneurs who had raised like $70 million over the course of his startups, he made a really good point about building for the next round. He always, whenever he closed a round, he said it was oversubscribed, no matter what. He always made it so that it was an oversubscribed round because the perception is reality. And so it built for those later stage investors to, give them more momentum around a storyline. I thought that was super interesting. Almost anybody could set up their round to say it's oversubscribed, right? Which is interesting. So
You're appealing to the marketer in me now. Go on.
There you go. So a typical investment process, right? So some angel groups require a screening call. You submit, there's a screening call. Maybe there's another call with a group of people. Then you get presented to the full group. Maybe there's some initial diligence before the full angel group. That's pre-diligence. Then hey, we're interested. We have a lead diligence partner that's going to take on. They do a heavier diligence cycle. They're negotiating some terms and valuations right then and there, or seeing what other people have invested in, or say they're interested, wait for a lead. And then there's an investment decision made. And that's when you start negotiating these things. Now, if you are doing a venture capital round, usually a lead's required to set the terms of the round. That's what the definition of a lead is. It's also them having a bigger check size or bigger wallet. So in case something goes awry, they can fund the company further. So that's kind of what a lead is. And people always ask for leads, but this is the typical process. The negotiation section is what we're going to focus on in the examples here in the back end of this presentation. But again, having a data room built, having it ready to go, having an initial data room of a block of information that's non-confidential is important because that starts the process. Because after they say, yeah, we're interested, what's the next thing? So you say, hey, I got a data room ready to go. Would you like to get access? Well, then your team would have access. It kind of kicks that next step for them, where then you're not waiting on them to say what they need. From that, they'll have more questions and more requests, and you can build up the data room from there with that individual investor. But the idea is having that initial data room ready, having all the stuff together, paperwork together up front, shows that you're kind of mature in this investment process, and it gives them a bit of confidence as well as you start working through this.
Hey, and real quick to Rich's point, because this is key, multiple levels of the data room, right? Do not show them everything. They don't need to see everything. You need to have different layers kind of mirroring their process as well. I think that's an important piece. We heard that advice from a VC on Wednesday.
So this is by definition, you're not going to have everything in here, but this is a nice kind of definition of a round of a pre-seed round. I always joke, this is the is it real phase. For post-ideation, is this a real thing, right? Does the market want it? We've worked on our tech transfer if we had to do that. We've gotten our regulatory strategy under lock. We've done an initial reimbursement assessment if we need one. We got some prototyping done. There's some initial market validations with stakeholders, right? We're doing a simple runway budget to understand 18 to 24 months of what we need to spend. And that's where we're filing maybe some phase 1 grants, right? Typical fundraisers in that range there. The next phase, which is seed, and again, everyone's got a different definition of these things, but this is where you got to do the most amount of stuff with the least amount of money, right? Seed stage sucks. Nobody likes it, but you got to get through it to get to that bigger round. You got to, basically do your design freeze, your QMS is designed and implemented. You got your regulatory pre-submissions maybe going through. There's some bench testing, clinical trial kicks off. You've done a regulatory submission if you can. You've done an exit trajectory design, right? That's where I talk about the end in mind, right? Our go-to-market commercialization and penetration has kind of been designed in some fashion. We built a model that kind of shows where we're going. We've got our contracting with manufacturers under lock, or if we're doing that internally, right? We're establishing our board of directors and corporate governance. We're doing all the things we got to do to get ready for the A round, which, going to the next slide.
And real quick to Rich's point, this used to be split into two. And this is why MedTech is so hard at this point. Like Rich kind of went over the go-to-market commercialization plan. That is a big piece of the seed round now. We see almost every investor ask about this. And it can't just be, again, this is where we go back to that point. It just can't be that you have CPT codes and DRG codes, or that I show it to a clinician and they love it. You have to have a real pitch figured out to your economic value of how you either are going to save or make the hospital money, or insurance companies are going to want to approve another X, right? You really have to have that thought out, because every investor, and this goes back to Rich's, again, the brutal honesty of why are we here? How are you getting that investor money back? And if there is no plan to show that, it's going to be a tough fundraising environment.
You're listening, Don?
The seed plus or Series A range, this is where we're getting our operations scaled up. We're getting that FDA clearance, or if you're PMA, you've probably got a longer haul with a clinical trial. We're doing our limited market release, right? We're tackling the friendlies. We got maybe Gen 2 design in place. Most importantly, we are refining our exit. We're refining our exit trajectory. We are refining our go-to-market commercialization plan. We are refining our budget and what our future rounds look like. The reason I'm emphasizing this so much is that we don't set it and forget it. You're constantly refining based on market feedback, what's going on in the industry. You got to continue to iterate on these things, because you got to stay in front of the curve as you approach investors. Being that iterative approach and making sure you're updating things is an imperative part of their understanding of, they're betting on you as the jockey. Can you do it? And so if you're not refining these things and you've done it once in your seed round, you never touch it again, it's not very helpful. All models are wrong. Some are useful. We need to make them useful. Series B, this is when we're going to that heavy commercialization effort. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
That was amusing.
Yeah. I got another one for you, Joe. Hang on.
I'm here.
The Series B, this is where we're going for that next heavy commercialization effort, right? In the Series A, you've got your product, you got your initial go-to-market. You're not a one-trick pony. You want to maximize your exit, you need to be investing back in further IP. The Gen 2, the next, how are you a platform and not a one-trick pony? Series B and beyond, this is where we're kind of getting into the mezzanine, we're getting into the potential IPOs, we're kind of pushing things to the next limit. We want to be a Shockwave Therapeutics type sale. Okay, well, what's our hands-off metrics? Where other areas are we going into? New products, new markets, new segments, new stakeholders, or same products, new stakeholders. How are we iterating and changing so that we're looking like a platform? That's the only reason we should be going into that next phase of this. So all in all, the point of this is really going through, it's a fundraising cycle. You do these things proactively, you're closing your books, you're having your board meeting, you're giving your reports out, you're sending an investor update out to your cap table. The next thing you're doing is sending that exact same update or some refinements to the next stage of investment, the next batch of investors that want to be tracking your progress that you want to know around. That's how you be proactive in this, and you start getting this governance down, this routine down. And so your backs should be never against the wall with, I'm out of money and I'm desperate. Because unfortunately, it happens to clients all the time. But if you're being proactive like this consistently, unless there's something really wrong with the company or the IP or the product or the market, this is a winning strategy. So before we go into the scenarios, I'll end with this. All companies are different. All companies have different journeys. Every MedTech company ends in a movie genre. There's the rom-com where everybody wins and everybody's happy.
This is what you were promising me?
This is what I was promising you. There's the drama where some people win, some people lose, some people aren't happy. And then there's a horror film where everybody's dead. You want to be on the rom-com side of this, and the way to do that initially is to get your proactive stuff done. Kind of everything we just talked about.
Rich, Joe, everyone else on the call, Rich loves saying this line. I hear it.
It's my zinger.
It is. I agree. It's awesome. Yeah. Rich gets so excited to be able to use it.
Yeah, I know. So these scenarios, these are all clients of ours. These are all negotiations we've handled with clients in the venture capital group. So scenario one is a venture capital firm. This is an equity type round. The opportunity, the company is a lead investor for the round. In addition, they have a series of other investors that have shown interest and will commit once the lead comes in. But the lead investor is pushing for a better valuation that is 2 to 4 million less than what the company wants. Now, I won't go because we're limited on time. I won't go in all the various rabbit holes here. But the important thing to take away from this is when the client approaches us with this problem, first of all, the 2 to 4 million, and again, I'm making up numbers here, but it's not an unreasonable gap. If we're talking about 15 million in valuation or 10 million, now you're out of range. It's not going to work. In theory, you can't negotiate that because there's something wrong with either your thesis or their thesis. So the fact that we're in a reasonable range for negotiation is a helpful starting point. The next thing I encourage the client to do is ask the question as to why they wanted that valuation. Was it just them working for a better deal? Or was there an underlying reason for it? And the underlying reason in this case was they wanted a specific percentage on the cap table. They needed to be X% of the business owned. And so, okay, well, that's helpful. But what the problem has become is that if we did that valuation, all the other investors are coming in at that same valuation, thus being more dilutive to the founders. So the strategy here was, guys, let's keep it at the higher valuation, but we're going to open our board up. Why don't you guys take a board seat as the lead investor, and we'll give you some equity shares as a board seat. You get to the same position in terms of ownership on the cap table, but the rest of the round is coming in at the higher valuation than being less diluted. So asking the right questions as to why they want that is an important starting point to understand how we can work around it. Scenario 2. So these are angels and angel groups. It's a convertible note. The company was raising a note of 5 with a 15 mil val cap, 20% discount. However, there's been market pushback on the valuation and there's been a lack of engagement. So how do we kind of reinvigorate the round? Well, in this case, this client had multiple value inflection points within that 5. We were trying to do it in a one-hit wonder. The challenge, though, was that the market was a turbulent time. So the fact that we had multiple value inflection points, we sliced the round in 2. We did a seed and a Series A, or seed and C plus, or seed and bridge round, whatever you want to call it. But the idea was you did a lower value cap to encourage engagement with 2.5. And then on the flip side, we had some milestones, and then we can go back to a higher valuation or a value cap on the second tranche. You didn't encourage people to invest in both tranches. You focused on the one, got the milestones to show traction, then moved on to the second. And so you don't have to, if you build a model and say, okay, I need to raise 5 million to get here, is there stuff in between where you can slice it and dice it to make it more opportunistic if people aren't engaging in the round? Scenario 3 was strategic capital, whether venture, hospital, whoever. In this case, the round was substantially filled, but we had an investor coming in that was really, really strategically aligned with the long-term vision, the commercial aspects and also the exit. And so the question became, how do we secure this investor? Because it's important for the company. We're going to oversubscribe. But the problem is, they're not interested. They are interested. They're on that kind of fence of whether they wanted to commit. How do you encourage them to get in the round so we can shut it down and move on to the next thing? And so in this case, we were able to sweeten the deal. And this is where we got into warrants and side letters. And in this case, the strategy was, let's deploy a warrant in a side letter form. We'll give them board observation rights or investor rights, pro rata, something like that. But in addition to that, we'll give you warrant coverage. So if I'm investing 500 right now, 500K, and this warrant coverage was 50% coverage of the next round at the same valuation. So it's as long as we did our job and achieved the milestones we wanted to, it's as if you got a 750 check, because the next 250 was coming in at the same valuation in the A round. Yes, it's more dilutive, but it got them over the hurdle to commit, because it's like, oh, there's a sweetener here, because I can commit more money at the same valuation later when it's been de-risked even further. So that was a very attractive thing to that strategic money. So my point in going through these scenarios, there's all these different levers you can pull to negotiate these things. Getting through that initial process and getting them interested and getting them to the negotiating table, that's step 1. That's the hard part. Once you're here, you can pull whatever levers you can to kind of encourage that investment and make it sense.
Very nice.